The most influential ism in the country today appears to be Hindutva. It has taken a long time for this ideology to come of age. But what happened to the other ideological movements that began in the early 20th century? The RSS will turn 100 years old next year, but so will the Communist Party of India. Ambedkarism, Marxism, liberalism, Dravidianism, feminism, Gandhiism. What role are these great big isms of the 20th century playing in the 21st century? What relevance do they have today?
Number 3.
I'm an atheist in the same way as I'm an leprechaun.
Why have there been casteism existing in the country still today?
Feminism, by definition, is the belief that men and women should have equal
So the
rights.
nature of the system is to be as mean and rotten as you can, to try to maximize profit.
I'm Sudipto Mondal, and welcome to this episode of What's Your Ism? Hello and welcome to What's Your Ism? I'm Sudipto Mondal. And today, for this show, we have a very different kind of guest. We've had activists of all sorts. Today's guest is somebody who's an activist in the field of technology, who brings together his learnings in the field of technology, sociology, and governance policy. He's a self-taught computer programmer and the founder of Hasgeek, Karana, and the Internet Freedom Foundation. Kiran Jonnalagadda.
Hi.
Welcome to What's Your Ism? You're here, of course, because of this viral article that you wrote just about a week ago.
Yes.
And you are part of a very, very select tribe of people in India who are resisting enrolling for Aadhaar.
Yes.
So your article was titled Life Without
Aadhaar.
Now, I was just looking up some of the claims that the UIDAI has put out. One of the things they say is that 99% of India has now been covered under Aadhaar.
How do they know?
How do they know is another question, but why are you not part of that 90 or 80 or 70 or whatever? There's a fairly large coverage by now.
I've had a very interesting week, with the responses to the article. And one of the things that people have said about me is that I'm ideologically opposed to Aadhaar. And I want to clarify that that's not true. Okay. The only reason I don't have an Aadhaar number yet is not for ideological reasons, it's for practical reasons. As far as I'm concerned, it's completely useless. Yeah? And the second part is, it is required in context in which it makes absolutely no sense. So when somebody asks me for an Aadhaar number for something that I have no business asking for, it's easier for me to end the conversation by saying, I don't have Aadhaar, move on, than to say, I have Aadhaar, but I will not give it to you, and I'll give you a lecture instead on why I will not give it to you. I don't want to be that kind of an asshole. So it's easier for me to just not have Aadhaar. It's just that. So
you're saying that, in the article also, the examples you shared, you go to purchase a car.
Yes. They don't know how to sell it to me without Aadhaar.
And then you have to point out to them that it is possible to sell it to you.
Yes.
Without an Aadhaar.
A PAN is enough. And so then they're very, very worried when they make a sale of this sort, because that's not their workflow. So when you disrupt a salesperson's workflow, they are left unsure if they are making a mistake or not. And then they have to go check. And that's uncomfortable for them, because then they're not closing the sale. So I could see my sales agent squirming about this thing, about saying, I'm saying no Aadhaar, please, sell the car.
Yeah.
And she's looking at me and saying, am I allowed to do this or not? Am I making a mistake that I will get punished for? So this, all of these things racing through their mind. It takes them a while to settle, and then they have to go ask the superiors and say, hey, is this okay? Can I do this without Aadhaar? And superiors also don't know, and then they have to go find out, and so there's a whole chain activated. And at the end of it, you got a sales agent slightly uncomfortable because they don't know what just happened. Why did I refuse to give Aadhaar? And so then there is a side conversation that they get into saying, tell me your reasons for not having Aadhaar, is everything all right? Is something going on, And then you end up giving them an ideological lecture about why you just refuse to give Aadhaar. It's sometimes it just ends there saying, your time is valuable, I don't have it, so please move on, settle for something else. And maybe they know that they can move on. Sometimes they don't. And then I've just ruined their day, because now they can't even sleep easy. It's something they're going to sleep over and say, because what happened? What did I do? What was this transaction that just happened?
And they don't sleep easy. Why? Because you open their eyes to what all can happen as a result of An Aadhaar
One
number?
is if they have listened that far, okay, or they are just sleeping over it thinking that this cranky customer is going to give you trouble tomorrow,
Right.
you know, when we finally close the sale.
Right.
So there is both of that, you know. It's either that they didn't understand and they put me out as an oddball that they have to be worried about for the rest of the transaction,
Right.
or I've given them something to think that's uncomfortable, and they don't know how to process it, you know. And people, when they're dealt with something that's uncomfortable, they will park it off as an anomaly in their head and not think about it further, you know. And that's a very natural way to react. So that situation happens a lot, you know, and it's now predictable that this is going to happen, and so I have to go anticipating this every single time I have somebody demanding Aadhaar for no good reason. I would say no to them.
Yeah, and this every single thing. I mean, for the benefit of people who are watching this, I mean, this is, I would imagine, as much of an educational episode as there are in the past. I mean, this is the
Right.
most technical session perhaps that we'll probably have in this series. So I'm going to try and take you step by step. So you try and get a car,
Yes.
and then all of this happens, and they
Yes.
finally give you the car. You try to get insurance.
Yes.
What happens then?
They bought the insurance, so they'll deal with it. You know, at least one of the things with the dealership is that they do most of the legwork. So they got me the insurance. My existing bank gave me a bank offer for a car without Aadhaar. They didn't ask for it. When I made an insurance claim is when it came up finally and said, you know, we processed the claim, but where's your Aadhaar? And Lucan says, why do you need it? You know, I mean, you already processed the claim. You're trying to close it now and trying to claim Aadhaar. It's too late for you, you know. You can't be doing it at this stage. You should have done it earlier if you really had it in your workflow. Now you just got some guy feeling worried that he's made a mistake, you know, without actually having made a mistake.
And it goes through finally with that. You get
Went
your
through,
claim.
I got the car back.
Then you get a home loan.
I got a home loan. This one was a bit of an adventure because, as it turns out, nobody knows how to issue a home loan, including bankers who specialize in home loans. And so I learned this in the process of trying to figure out where to get a home loan from, because one of the things I was curious about is, one, not just who's going to give it to me without Aadhaar, but also what are the rates? You know, I want a home loan for two reasons. You know, I want a good rate, and I want a bank that's going to verify the documents, because that is not my expertise. You know, part of the reason you take a home loan, even if you do not necessarily need a home loan, is because you're outsourcing verification to an entity that is serious about it, you know, and is taking a risk on it. And so, for this sake, I went to multiple banks. One of the properties I was looking at was financed by Union Bank. So we figured, okay, then if Union Bank has financed the property previously, maybe they'll give it to us. They said we can't do it without Aadhaar, you know. And so I asked them to say, verify and say, where is this requirement coming from? And so the bank manager says, my lawyer has advised me, this is the lawyer's advice. So I'm held by it, you know, that I can't go against my own lawyer's advice that the bank has nominated to me. So it's okay, fine, dead end over there. Fortunately, we didn't go ahead with that property. We went to HDFC. HDFC, everything is outsourced, you know. So I had the same experience when I went for the car loan. HDFC offered me the car loan online on their website, but they also had an agent for the car loan. The agent wanted my Aadhaar, wanted my income tax returns, wanted passwords to everything. And he said, fuck off, you know, like, you're not going to get this. I'm sorry for the word, but I'm not going to give you these ridiculous things just because you want them, you know, especially not over WhatsApp, which is where they're asking for. It's not like they're asking me to write it down. They're saying, send everything over WhatsApp. But their own bank on their own website gave me the car loan, you know, without any manual intervention. At the home loan, same thing happens. But this time it gets even worse. They want the GST portal logins of my company, saying that the company that pays my salary, they want to verify that is going to actually pay your salary over the next 20 years. So they want proof by looking at the company's financial records. Look at them and says, hello, you know, where is this requirement coming from? The role is for me.
And it's against the property.
And it's against the property. It's a property that's insured. You have my credit score. I've been, you know, a customer of this bank for like 20 odd years.
The deal is about a hypothecation deal, right?
It's a hypothecation deal, exactly.
Yeah.
So you look at them and say, and you want all this on WhatsApp, you know. It is not even an official bank email address.
Wow.
So are you really an employee of the bank in the first place? How do I know now? Okay, so I had to refuse and say, I'm not going to deal with you. Send me an official email from your work email address if you want these things. That never happened. And we had to point this out to the manager as well and say, look, you know, we don't know what your system is, but this is clearly not clean. So we can't do this with you. I went to SBI, the State Bank of India, and the manager again had his long list of requirements. And at one point I told him and said, I can't give you Aadhaar. And he was curious and said, why not? So I told him and said, look, you know, I have a case going on in the government. And the fellow got very worried and said, look, you know, if the government's suing you for tax, then we don't know if we can give you a home loan. We'll have to check. This is, the government's not sued me. I have sued the government, And the fellow just didn't know what to make of it. He was just looking at me and saying, what does that mean? Who sues the government? So it didn't work out with him either. But we went to a different branch of SBI where somebody told us to go talk to the agent who sits over there and not the manager. And it turns out that this was another branch of SBI where the home loan agent used to work at the bank, had long retired, but knew the process. And so the managers depended on him. And the manager gets replaced every 2 or 3 years. And they come in, they don't know the neighborhood, they don't know what kind of properties are being sold in this area, what the documentation is like. But the agent who's retired is the one who knows. So they outsource it to him. And this man just sits in the bank, gets all the referrals right there and works them out. And the fellow is really good at it. He didn't have any hang-ups about whether we are clean or whether the property is clean or whatnot. He just said, look, the way we're going to look at this is, first we're going to make sure you're okay for the bank. We'll look at your financial records. If you don't have Aadhaar, it's fine, because that was not a requirement until last year, So he's been processing home loans his entire career. He knows how to actually check the credentials of a person. So he went through the process and said, first we're going to verify that you're okay for the bank so that this will not become a problem when you find the property. Then we're going to go find your property, go through all the documents, find everything, make sure it's all fine and get it through. And the whole process took about 9 months, from starting with saying, let's go find a house, to, finding a bank that was nice to work with, to finding a property that was nice to buy and had clean documents, and then finally settling it and, moving into the place. But once we found the right person, all obstacles went out of the way. All it required was someone to look at the obstacle course and say, I know how to run over it, come along, none of these obstacles are going to stop you.
And these are in dealings with private entities.
Yeah.
You have a bank, what have you, a car dealership.
Yeah.
But in the dealings with the government, what has been your experience? So there is the question of Provident Fund.
Yes.
There is a time, I think, during the lockdown, you lost your job or something happened?
I didn't lose my job. It's last year. Last year has been really bad for the IT market.
Okay.
And as the head of a company, I'm responsible for the company's income. Which means that if you have a cash crunch, then I'm the one who's going to take a salary hit just so that everybody else gets paid. But where does my backup come from? And that was when I got hit by SEBI blocking the markets illegally, because they issued a notice asking for the market players to block access to securities on the basis of a CBDT notice that was already obsolete. CBDT had withdrawn it.
CBDT?
The Central Board of Direct Taxes, which is the department of the government that collects income tax. So CBDT, the legal entity, decides what is a valid or invalid PAN. They had variable definitions that have been changing over the years because they have realized there are consequences to those definitions as well. At one point, the threat was that your PAN will become invalid. But PAN, P stands for permanent. It's a permanent account number. So when you make somebody's PAN invalid, what happens to the tax record? Are you saying it's erased and they get a clean sheet? No, imagine the fraud possible if the government erases your tax record and says we have no idea of any taxes you've paid in the past or any liabilities you have outstanding. Yeah? It doesn't take more than 2 brain cells to look at this and say this is a bad idea. You can't invalidate somebody's PAN. So then that definition changed. It went from invalid to inactive. Yeah? And they said it's inactive, you can't use it anymore. Great, how do I pay taxes now? Yeah? So is the government going to sacrifice this ability to collect my tax because they don't recognize my PAN number?
Because it's not linked to Aadhaar.
No, because they've declared it as invalid. Remember? I mean, they are threatening on the basis of saying that if it is not linked to Aadhaar, first we will, make it invalid. Then they realize that no, you can't do that because then you'll lose the fellow's tax history.
Yeah.
So instead of invalid, they say we'll make it inactive. You can't use it in a transaction. Then how do I pay my taxes? What PAN number are you collecting my taxes against? Yeah? And that is not something that the government wants. They will never hurt their own ability to collect tax. So then they change the definition again, say, okay, it is not going to be inactive. It's going to be active but inoperational. Okay? And now it's 2 words. Okay?
So from, what do you say?
Invalid became inactive to become active but inoperational.
Which means now what?
And so there's an FAQ on their website. You have to go look it up and say, now what does this mean?
Yeah.
It's active now, but it is inoperational. What does inoperational mean? They are not very clear about it. The only consequence is you will not get a tax refund and your TDS rate is 20%. That's the only consequence of an inoperative PAN. Everything else is life as normal. But then SEBI, unable to keep up with all of these changing definition, goes and picks the old one and tells the market and say, look, these are all inactive PANs now, which have not been linked with Aadhaar. Stop letting them access the markets. And so that's what happens. Like my SIPs all stop filing. None of these can be withdrawn anymore because they've been refused at the fund clearing agency. I can't redeem, I can't invest, I can't do anything. Like all my trades are blocked. And at this point, I'm looking at this and saying, do I go to court now? And this would have been my third case if I had gone to court. And there is the exhaustion of going to court and nothing happening because you wait, months to years before you get a hearing. And so it doesn't look like something that you should do in a rush, because I mean, it's blocked today. Do I go to court today? What's the difference between today and tomorrow when the hearing is going to be next year? And so I didn't go to court. I put it off. I felt lazy. And by the time I ended up having to make up my mind about going to court, they had withdrawn the order. But that's like a year later now. And for 1 year, they've been illegally blocking the market. And it's not been challenged in court. All I know is that
blocking the market or blocking
our access to the market. Blocking all of us.
For outliers.
Yes, but it's not just us. Remember, anybody who's not linked PAN with Aadhaar, which is a very large number. Okay. NRIs can't do it because they need to be physically present. Anybody who's got a name mismatch can't do it. There are people in this country who are barred from getting Aadhaar because all the enrollment centers in the neighborhood have been shut down. All the border states, for instance. And this has been a known thing for many years. That Assam, Meghalaya, and one other state, I forget which one, have had Aadhaar enrollments discontinued for many years now because the government's afraid of illegal immigrants getting Aadhaar and getting access to the state's institutions through Aadhaar.
In fact, if I'm not mistaken, just a few months ago in Bengal, a few Aadhaar numbers were cancelled.
Yeah.
A fairly large number.
Yes, but of them. Where is the proof that they were correctly cancelled? Where is the proof that the wrong people have not been excluded? Right. There is no audit report for any of these things. So there are people in this country who are being denied Aadhaar for no fault of theirs and now being denied everything else that follows, and it is on them to establish their innocence. And how do you do that? Like, you can go to court, sure, but when is the court going to hear you? How many years later are they going to hear you? When you have no money to withdraw right now for your day-to-day life. Yeah. So this is the problem. And this has kind of been going on with coercion. It's SEBI's illegal order. CBDT itself unable to make up its mind about what is it trying to achieve by linking PAN with Aadhaar. And then you got EPFO, which is the other place where coercion happens. And these are all the
EPFO case.
Yes.
The Provident Fund case is in the High Court.
That's in the High Court, yes.
There are two cases in the High Court.
One is for CBDT against PAN Aadhaar linking, and one is against EPFO for Aadhaar for Provident Fund.
Yeah. And both of them are in a way linked, right? Because it is the EPFO which is asking for the PAN and the Aadhaar to be linked in the first place.
No, they want the PF and the Aadhaar to be linked. That's a separate linking requirement. Okay. That they want an Aadhaar number provided against your PF, or they will not accept further deposits or withdrawal requests. And so again, it's blocking an individual savings.
So in one case, the respondent is the PF office, and the other one?
Respondent is the income tax office.
Right.
The income tax office is the second case, by the way. So the first case we filed was in 2019. That case, the judge gave us an immediate hearing and ordered a stay until CBDT responded. They never responded. So 2019, they didn't come back. 2020, there was a pandemic. It was not a priority anymore. So lawyers also said that, look, the courts are busy. Your case is not their priority. So it is going to stay in stasis where there's a stay order for the petitioners, but government does whatever else it wants to everybody else. Fortunately, CBDT kept extending the deadline, so it was not really an impact. In 2023, they came back to court and requested the judge saying, look, the deadline is going to be extended again because we are bound by another court case, which is the Gujarat High Court, which, I've forgotten the name of the person who filed the case there, but that judgment said that there is a review petition in the Supreme Court under Roger Matthew versus Union Bank or Bank of India, I forgot which one. It was against a bank originally, and that ended up becoming a case about whether a money bill was valid in these scenarios.
The Aadhaar Act itself?
The two of them. The two of them. The Aadhaar Act and the Finance Act of 2017, which made PAN Aadhaar linking mandatory, they were both money bills. Right. So that case is, can this be done through a money bill? So the Supreme Court is not yet heard that petition. It is still pending. The Gujarat High Court said you can't make PAN Aadhaar linking until that case is settled. because that case may invalidate your linking and cause undue harm to people. In Karnataka High Court, CBDT's lawyers show up now 2023, that's what, 5 years or 4 years after the case had originally been filed, and finally say, please close the case. It is not necessary because the deadline will be extended because of the Gujarat High Court order. So they tell the judge that. Our lawyer says, well, we can't argue against that. And the judge says, fine, let's close the case then.
So is there some kind of suspended animation? There's this almost like the sword hanging.
Yeah.
And
so the judge says, we'll close the case, but normally when a case is closed, you can't reopen it as a petitioner. In this case, the judge gave us leave and said, if they don't keep their word, please reopen the case.
Achha.
And they didn't extend the deadline.
Then what happens?
So we filed again.
And your lawyer vanished or something. What happened there?
That was an EPFO case. Okay. So in this case, we reopened the case. The lawyer who represented us the first time became a petitioner the second time, because he was also personally affected. Right. And so then he ended up being a separate lawyer to represent us this time. So we filed the case again. This June, the judge finally heard a case. I think it was a new incoming judge, because there was a lot of hype about this fellow actually applying the law properly, which the lawyers felt encouraged by saying, here is someone who's actually reading the law and applying his mind, which is great. You don't get this chance very often. A lot of them are very scared to act against the government. So we had a lawyer who again went through the facts of the case, and he's got a single page order, and it's very clean because it just says these are the facts of the case. The petitioners claim that the Gujarat High Court is blocking, the existing Gujarat High Court order is blocking paneling Aadhaar linking from being enforced. The Union of India, CBDT has no response to this fact. Therefore, we are ordering a stay again, but only for the petitioners, not for the public, because it's a petitioner saying we want relief for ourselves.
So which means
that I am exempt from Aadhaar linking, but you are not. Yeah? And you look at that and say that is injustice. That is not how law should work.
Because it is a petition on behalf of the public, isn't it?
No, it is not. It's not a PIL.
Oh, it's not. It's a personal.
And so this is the other part,
Right.
That the judge is within their rights to say this affects everybody, so let's make it a general order. But every lawyer I've spoken with says, never dare to ask for that outcome, because then you're asking for a judge to stick their neck out. Okay? And that goes.
So you hope for your case to set a precedence?
Always hope for your case and let the next person ask for the same to be applied to them. I mean, after all, what did we do? We just said Gujarat High Court order applied to us, right? I mean, that's what a lawyer argued for. And for the judge, it was no-brainer, saying that someone else has bothered to go examine the facts of the case and made a judgment. And if these people are claiming the exact same thing, then it's easy to say, yes, I don't need to cross-verify. So it's easy on their caseload to say, extend a judgment to the next person. Okay? If they had to go into saying, I will examine the facts of the case myself. Now, one, it is extending their caseload, which is a problem for most judges. Second, what if he comes to an outcome that is actually bad? I mean, it's a risk you're taking, right? Then you have to go appeal again. So it is generally always safe to not do a PIL, but instead ask for personal relief and set a precedent that the next person can say, I also want this for myself. And that can be done. And so we need a lot more people doing this.
But there are only that many.
There are only that many who are sticking their neck out to say, let's do this.
The last of the Mohicans.
I wouldn't say that. It's
now tell me, actually, so I think this is a good time to get into this ideological question, right? Wow, right. What is it that drives you? I mean, why do you want to do this? What's your problem?
I would say I don't like being insulted. Okay. It's a very basic request for dignity, and saying that if you try to tell me something stupid and say I must be too idiotic to not understand it, maybe that's true. Maybe I overestimate my own intelligence and I don't understand. Or maybe that's not the case and it's the other way around. Okay. And someone's making a very stupid claim and saying this is going to solve a problem, no, it does not actually solve. And in this case, I have the unfortunate experience of actually having worked in government and seeing what happens behind the scenes and where these ideas come from. And so there's always been the doubt of saying, I actually know how these people are thinking when they ask for these things and implement them in these specific manners. And
break it down.
They're all justified.
What are these things?
So the broad arc is computerization or digitalization. And you can put this back to the end of the 1980s.
Of the entire population?
Of the population. So if you look at the way things were done at the time of independence, when independent India was put together from the British Empire and various princely states, you're not only a culturally diverse society, you're also an administratively diverse society. Every kingdom's got its own way of doing things. Now, how do you unify them into common law and say that there is one constitution that comes as a derivative of some ideas we got from the British, but is applied to princely states that are not related at all? They have no prior history of these laws. And so when you start doing that, you discover that it doesn't fit the society you're trying to impose it on. And so what you must do is you must have discretionary authority of your local officials. And so you initially start with states organized around prior administrative boundaries. Then eventually you try to merge your cultural boundary with your administrative boundary by doing the linguistic unification of states. Okay? But you have not solved your administrative disparity, and that continues to have a long shadow. I mean, if you look at the way Telangana split out from Andhra Pradesh, that boundary was the Nizam's boundary before independence. It's effectively the same thing, that administrative disparity, despite decades of unification under a single state administration, didn't last. And so they had to ask for it to be broken up again and say, look, we want our own way of doing things, because it doesn't work for us to be operating in the same manner as a different administration that has a different trajectory and going back many more hundreds of years in time. So these things happen everywhere. And so what happens then is, to manage a large country, you must have local administrative authority. And we have had a constitutional mandate of saying, we do not like local administrative authority. We're going to have a central level, we're going to have a state level, and we're not going to have a lot lower levels. Like the mayor of the city is someone that nobody even knows exists, And has there been a mayor in the city for the last 5 years? Have they even conducted elections? In fact, I don't think they have. And the point is that I don't even know anymore. It is just not impacting my life in any way. And this has been a feature of the country since independence. That one of the ways to unify this country socially, make it a cohesive unit, was to make it very top-down. But you can't run it unless it's very bottom-up. The administration has to be bottom-up. And so you've got many decades of this cross-struggle going on. You've got the constitutional amendments that were passed by the Rajiv Gandhi regime that created a Panchayati Raj and basically said, let's have local level administration in this country. As a constitutional amendment, there were two of them, I think, passed back-to-back. But they have not been completely effective. We still do not really care about our city administration as an administratively independent unit you can hold accountable. Any problem with the city, you always look at the state government. So you got a problem here in the way the country is organized for historical reasons, and it is not possible to simplify this and say, this is the exact reason. But that's a trajectory that affects the way administration works. While you need local administration, the emphasis is always centralized administration, central level, state level, very little below that. And constitutional reforms not really having that much of an impact in changing what's been already in place for a few decades after independence. On the other hand, you got computerization, which is the other part that comes out during Rajiv Gandhi's time with what's called the new computer policy. And that regime didn't last, but those ideas stayed afloat after liberalization. And one of those ideas was, if you use computers, you can liberate files which are stuck on paper and stuck in a government office somewhere in some remote location. What knowledge is stuck in those files, nobody knows. Even the administration doesn't know it. Somebody has to physically retrieve the file and look at it and say, here is an observation somebody made about why the administration is to be done in a certain manner because of certain ground condition. What if you could digitize the knowledge so that everybody else could look at it and say, this is why we must...
You could be sitting in Delhi and we could be looking at a file in some...
Exactly. Okay. So this was a vision floated by the Rajiv Gandhi regime before liberalization. Obviously, way too early for any of this to happen. But what it did make possible was the import of computers. That you had a restricted economy, you say, okay, let's start importing computers because you need to realize this vision. And the two industries that were the first to computerize are one, the railways, and second, the banks. Banks started setting up computer departments in the early 90s. So, like my father used to work at Canara Bank. They have a computer policy and planning department on MG Road, behind the Taj Hotel. And that was where their entire, nationwide computerization policy was run out of. So while banks continue to have rural branches which have no internet connection and they're all paper files and whatnot, all of the data now previously was statistical collection to say, here is a picture of the country. But now it is actual data collection to say, feed it into the computer. So you have a centralized view of all the accounts. And if you remember your passbooks from banks about 20 years ago, you would take a passbook to one of those passbook printing machines, and it would print it out, and give you a statement. And your passbook now came out of the computer, while previously it was handwritten by the officer every time you went to the bank. So we seem to have forgotten that some of these transitions happened. That there was this period of transition from where it was all paper to being partially paper, partially digital, to now being fully digital. But the transition period, you have two realities. There is what's on paper, there's what's in the computer. Which one is the real one? If there is a disagreement between these two records, which one do you say is the authoritative source? The other one must be corrected to.
The paper source?
That transition is a legal transition. You have to change the law to say that what's in the computer is the legal version versus what's in the paper is the legal version. So obviously it was paper was the legal version initially. And so you had this transition period where you were doing things with computers. You were forcing people to use computers, but only the paper was legal. Yeah? And you have to change the law, but you can only change the law when you're sure that this is really working. And so that transition period is where the coercion happens. Where the
transition from where?
From paper records to digital records is where coercion happens, because the law does not allow the digital record to override. But it is operationally convenient. It's great for the fellows in the central, where now they have a clear view of the entire state. So they want it to be real at any cost. And
so what happened to move to a point where the paper doesn't matter, you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. Because they want to move to digital. And so what happens there is that you have this transition period where you want the computer record to be the authoritative record. You're going to behave like it is, even though it is not. It is a paper that's authoritative. Okay? But what you have to do now is you believe the paper is not clean because it's corrupt, because people can do whatever they want, take a bribe to write a paper record. Whereas in the computer you can set up workflows and make it harder for them to take a bribe.
Or for it to be overwritten.
Or to be overwritten. So basically, because the person who was previously the authoritative paper is only a typist on the computer, and they can't change what the UI does not allow them to do. So there is a sense of centralized control saying that at the center, we define the limits of how they can modify this data. And so we can catch them doing fraud. And so that is the other part. You sell it as a vision of fixing corruption by saying, I can oversee what the people at the ground are doing, because they're limited in what they can do with this computer. Except that legally is not valid. It's a paper that's valid. Okay? And so now what you do is you coerce your own officials and say, we know the law says paper is valid, but you're going to be penalized for that. The computer is the new god. The authority is now the computer. The law will catch up. But in the meanwhile, you're going to be penalized if you try to avoid this and try to use paper again. Okay? And that coercion is happening again with Aadhaar. It's exactly the same thing. It's this transition period. Okay?
Wherein finally your Aadhaar could be your iris or your thumbprint.
It is. So there is a second thing with Aadhaar. So this is one half of it. One of it is this. This is the way government processes work. That in the process of process reform, their initial implementation is technically not legal. It is just executive authority, and they're waiting for the law to catch up, which then has checks and balances to go through. Sometimes you just can't wait, and so you do things like a money bill and say, it's too much effort doing the law correctly, so we'll just ram it through with whatever way is possible, voice votes, money bill, whatever, which you can do when you're a majority government. You can't do that in a coalition government. So this is one reason why coalition governments are generally safer. They don't get much done, but they also can't do rubbish that easily because there's a little more friction towards executive action. One example of how this gets incredibly stupid, and this is pre-Aadhaar. Aadhaar is just the latest in this trend of behavior. In 2008, when my wife and I were getting married, it was under the Special Marriages Act. So we went to the registrar's office in Shantinagar. And there was another couple next to us. The registrar was not very happy with them, and tried to shoo them off and basically say, you can't get married, effectively. And at that point, I had no clear understanding of why they would say that to someone. And I didn't pay attention. It's just something that's remained with me since, saying that they were actively discouraging one couple from trying to get married. And they were very friendly with us and said, yeah, you guys fill out the form, you're done. But the form is a booklet, in which you need to put on your entire antecedent, because there's a 30-day waiting period where they pin it up on the notice board. So it's a bloody long form, and they made me fill it in triplicate. Okay? And so I went through this entire process. And at one point they said, what is your address proof? So I had my passport. My passport had my parents' address. It was not where I was living. But the only other thing I had was my rental agreement. And the rental agreement I not bothered to renew because, the landlord was cool. So we did it for the first 11 months. We didn't bother to renew for the next 11 months. So it was not valid at that point in time. So I had nothing but my parents' address to give them. But because it was my passport, they were quite happy to take it. Then they asked and say, how long have you been living at this address? Now the fact is I'm not living there. And what do I put in there? So I put in how long I lived there before moving out. And so I said 10 years. So I just wrote 10 years on the form. In triplicate, okay? Fill it out in triplicate. And so we're done with this thing, and he said, this is exhausting. It hurts your fingers because I've not done this much writing for many, many years at this point. And then this registrar gives it to the computer operator next to him. She opens up a form on a computer, types everything out, prints it in triplicate, and says, sign again. He says, what? Why did you make me write it in triplicate if you're going to type it in, print it, and again say 3 copies, sign it again? Okay? So I had to look at this and say, what the hell is the point of this? You could have just given me the form. I'm far faster typing on a computer than writing on paper. So there was that part. But then there was something else that happened while this lady was typing it out. At some point in the form, it asks, what is the address and what is the period of residency of the address. I had put 10 years. She types 10. Form doesn't accept it. And then we look carefully, it says number of days. And so she has to write 10 years in the number of days. And so she's stumped for a minute, looking at this computer, looking at my paper, saying, what do I type here? And she hit start menu, programs, accessories, calculator.
3,650 days.
10 into 365. Okay. And she's 3,650 days. And I'm looking at this. One, you need a calculator to add a 0. Second, you forgot leap years. 10 years, there are at least 2 leap years in it. Okay. It is not 3,650 years. Okay. So it is 2 days more in that. Okay. So one, you have mistranslated what I wrote. Okay. You have taken my very ambiguous 10 years, which nobody will look at this and say 10 years and 0 days is what I mean. Nobody is going to interpret it like that. You have turned it into a very precise 3,650 days. Okay. So you have misrepresented what I was trying to say here. If I was filling in this form, that would be my liability. That it's my claim. But now it's the operator's claim that I've been living here for this long. Okay? Where is this operator's claim being attested? So that it's not my liability. I mean, I was looking at the screen so I could see it being done. But if a typist is translating units because the form forces them to translate, where are they being added to the form as the source of the liability? That is just completely missing in the design of this workflow. Okay? So there is a problem here that you have changed the data. You have created 2 versions. On paper, it says something. The translated version of your computer says something else. Okay? The translation, fine, you applied a process. But you can't do a reverse translation and get back 10 years approximation. Because you can't go back from precise to saying it's not actually precise, it's approximate. That flag is not there in your software. If you add a flag for every one of these things, that form is going to become super complicated. So they always tend to simplify it and say, you can't do calculations on approximations, so you must collect precise data. But which one of these is the truth? Okay? Now, they made me sign the printout also in triplicate. So if there is a dispute, I've signed both. The liability is mine. Okay? But in their systems, one of these things cannot exist. So they are going to put this paper form for legal reasons in their stack of paper files that goes into the cupboard and never comes out. Okay? The digital version goes into a computer where it has no legal basis because the law does not recognize it. Until the law changes, it is just there for somebody's convenience to query. Okay? At some point, they will modify the law to say digital records are valid. Okay? So what they've done is effectively an illegal exercise. Okay? I mean, it is potentially sanctioned under executive authority, saying the executive has authorized to do such things, and therefore it's not actually illegal. It is just a redundant exercise, in this transition period. It has its flaws, like simple things like unit conversion. And the only person liable is the fellow who signed the papers, which is me. So you have outsourced liability to the citizen for something the executive is doing on an experimental basis. Yeah?
And that applies to Aadhaar how?
Well, simple example in Aadhaar. What is the date of birth? Yeah? Aadhaar wants you to give your date of birth. You have to give a year, a month, and a date. There are a lot of people who don't know it. Yeah? Sometimes they have 2 dates of birth because the birth certificate has one, the school certificate has one, which is something the parents might have done to get them into school admission. They change the birth date. school didn't check, they got in, and finally whatever was printed on your 10th standard marks card is legally valid. But you also have a birth certificate which is a different date. So there are people with 2 different dates of birth. And depending on the situation, they would use one of these 2 documents. Yeah. Like if it is anything linked to their school record, like their entire academic record will go on their school record. So all of that has one fake date of birth. The real date of birth probably went on a passport, PAN, or whatever else, or probably did not. Okay. So there are people who, first of all, have to live with 2 dates of birth for no fault of theirs because something their parents did. Okay. And both of them are legally valid. In Aadhaar, you can only have one. Okay. So in Aadhaar, they let you change your date of birth once. You can put in a date of birth, but it may have been a mistake. You are allowed to change once. You can put in a change request only once. You can't change it a second time. And there are people who have done it in the opposite direction. You know, they put in one date of birth, they put in another date of birth. They've realized that the first one is more convenient for them, and they can't go back. So they're stuck. You know, that the design decision has forced them into choosing one date of birth, even though their life requires them to live with 2 dates of birth. But there are other people who have no documentation at all and don't even remember it. You know, maybe their culture used the lunar calendar, local cultural calendars. They have no idea what it translates to in the solar calendar. You know, they misremember it. They can't even calculate it back. They have a sense of saying I was born in some year, or you know, my age is so much. But what is the date? Yeah. And they don't know. And you got a form that says you must put in the full record. You must put in a year. You must put in a month. You must put in a date. You can't put an age. So you go to an operator and say, you know, my age is 45. And the operator says, okay, it's 2024 minus 45, 1979. So you were born on January 1st, 1979. And they put that in the form. And that is an extremely common thing. January 1st is the most popular birth date in this country because that is the official process for putting in somebody when they don't know their date of birth. You just take their approximate age, back calculate the year, and put January 1st. Okay?
So there is the issue of inaccuracies creeping into this digital
But by
record.
design, remember, the design said...
And by design, so for instance, one of the things you've said in the past is that, and not just you, a lot of people have pointed out that the fingerprint is not a reliable identifier.
Yes.
Neither is the iris.
It's not reliable.
It's not reliable either. So there is this aspect of the quality of the data which is being captured.
Yes.
And the inaccuracies that creep into this digital database.
Yes.
Is that where your ideological problem is coming from?
No,
I think it's a lot more to do with security and surveillance.
It's about the process. I mean, when you say, for instance, that your official process for putting a birth date in Aadhaar is if you don't know, make it January 1st.
Yeah.
And UIDAI said that this is actually the process. Because there was a media report saying that some reporter found an entire village where everybody was born January 1st. You know, and said, what is this miracle? You know, like, is something happening with the sex lives of the people in this village that they're all getting born on the same day? You know, of course not. You know, it's a data entry mistake. And in this case, UIDAI put out a press notice claiming that, no, this is the process. That when they don't know the date of birth, the market is January 1st. And the market in the records are saying that this is, you know, an approximation. Okay? Now, whether they have a flag saying this is approximate or not, I am not aware of. You know, but it's also a question of saying, is the operator checking the flag or not? Remember, what if somebody was really born on January 1st? And you said, no, it's not actually January 1st, this is also an approximation because we don't know the difference now.
So, okay, but if there were inaccuracies, let's say.
So the thing is that this problem, if it had gone through a legislative process where you're minting January 1st as a birth rate, you would expect that a legislative process and say, then you cannot have a birth rate field. You know, your field must have a qualifier saying birth rate or age of enrollment because you don't know the birth rate.
But so is your iris and your thumbprint is also an approximation in a sense. Right?
Yes, it is. So all of these things, if they had gone through actual legislative scrutiny, would have been clarified in these manners and say that, look, you can't put, you know, fill up or autocomplete your date of birth to January 1st. You must put in a clarification saying that it's not known. And don't mess up with the lives of people who are actually born on January 1st. You know, because nobody believes that that's the real birth rate anymore. So
these inaccuracies which are by design.
Yeah, these are shortcuts. That they just assume that since most people will not have this problem, you know, let's forget about the ones who do have a problem.
Right.
And we'll deal with it later. You know, and that deal with it later is what executive does, which is what the legislature is supposed to stop it from happening. And say, no, you cannot postpone serious problems like this where you destroy someone's life. Okay? Same thing happens with biometrics. Biometrics in Aadhaar are optional because it doesn't work for everyone. But who decides that it's optional for you?
I don't have the discretion to do that.
You don't have the discretion to do that. Enrollment operator does. If the enrollment operator can see that you are missing your limbs, they can put it and say this person does not have biometrics. Either the missing fingers or it's not scanning. So please process this enrollment without their biometrics. And here is my identity as the person who verified it. Yeah? And that's their official process. That's fine. But who are they? How does the government know who this person is who's clarified saying that I have confirmed this person does not have biometrics and they are allowed to enroll? So they allowed private operators to do this because they didn't want to let the government get into the process of enrollments. So it's not a gazetted officer, who's got sworn to duty certifying that you don't have biometrics. It is just some private enrollment operator who's getting paid per enrollment. So he's obviously incentivized to go ahead and take it. So when this happens, obviously you're going to get fake records in the database. Yeah? And then they blacklisted 50,000 operators across the country saying they're engaged in fraud. And now what happened to the genuine people who enrolled versus the fraudsters who enrolled? Who's the distinguishing factor? You've solved the problem by getting rid of the operator and saying this operator is not authorized anymore. But who's gone and verified who's genuine and who's fraud? They have no ground presence at all, and that's their entire design, that it's all digital. We do not need these employees. We do not need this workforce. We will outsource verification, but the incentive for outsourcing is profit, not duty.
And the basic objective of it gets defeated, which is that it is not unique.
Exactly.
The fraud in this case essentially means that there is multiplication, duplication and all of that happening.
Yes, plus
people getting entered.
You do not take biometrics for children. Okay? If you enroll children at birth, and in some cases they enroll them before the birth certificate, although that is now banned, as of October 2023, you must have a birth certificate before you get enrolled in Aadhaar. Until then, it was not. There was just so much enthusiasm for showing Aadhaar enrollment that they would take a baby direct to enrollment first, then give them a birth certificate. And you can't collect biometrics on that. You're putting the parents' biometrics and saying, this parent has this child. Their verification is how you know that it's fraud or not. Okay? But is there a limit to how many children you can have? Yeah? How do you distinguish between a real baby being enrolled versus a fraudulent enrollment?
Right.
And no biometrics required. You got them an Aadhaar number. Where is the check on how many babies you're allowed to register like this? Is there a limit to how many babies you're allowed to have? And who's enforcing this? Now, if UIDAI makes up their own limit and says, hey, this fellow's enrolled 10 babies, he can't have 10 children, something is happening here. And they can crack down. Yes, they can do that. But on what authority? Who are they to decide how many children you're allowed to have? Where is the distinction between real and fraud anymore? Where is the verification happening? Yeah? You can't do this looking at a database and saying, I see a pattern in the database that looks like fraud to me, and so I block this person. Yeah.
And yet this database, despite this quality issue, is a very valued item in the marketplace. And I suppose some of your opposition to these large database collection exercises comes from who all might be interested in accessing this. And of course, I just kind of went through some stuff online, and there have been multiple breaches of this database. I mean, I think the year that the Supreme Court order upholding the Aadhaar Act came, it was 2018. The same year it was, I think you guys also were all on an overdrive.
So there are a whole bunch of, private parties which have been collecting Aadhaar for various reasons and not taking care of the security, and it leaks. Like this week itself, there has been this restaurant QR code thing that has become, a public news item, that one restaurant, one technology provider who offers the QR codes for menus at restaurants has completely public APIs. Anybody can go query their API and find out who's ordered what in any restaurant in this country.
API?
Their website. So while it is a phone app through which you place your orders, it's a company that did not bother with security at all. Their APIs were completely public. You could see the order details of any person you like at any restaurant that takes their technology, and it was completely public. And when the person who put this out, wrote an article explaining how we verified that this was possible, and he verified it by placing an order at the next table to confirm that it was actually being delivered over there, even though they had not ordered it. Makes a public post about this. The company sends him a legal notice and asks him to take it off. Now, this is not Aadhaar. Okay? This is just a case of phone numbers and order details leaking.
No, but look at what happened in Aadhaar, right?
But it's the same thing, that company has no legal accountability. There is no culture of security outside of a few companies that are serious about it. There is no public accountability for them. Nobody is going to sue them for it. Nobody is going to go to jail for it. It is just going to be a scandal for a week and then it's over. Okay? And that's been happening with Aadhaar, and everybody who's been collecting Aadhaar for the past decade.
What about those scandals? I mean, I just wanted to list those out if you'll allow me. So in 2018, about what, 1.1 billion Indians had their data breached?
Yeah, I don't know the number.
That I just pulled it out on the internet. I mean, and of course that Tribune investigation where they purchased the entire database for just
so that happened after the 50,000 got blacklisted. And one of the things that happened, is that you may have blacklisted 50,000 operators and disabled their login IDs, but you're not disabled the technology through which they log in. The website where they were logging in was not taken down. And the people who were remaining as admins discovered that there was a lucrative black market for them, that they will create new accounts and sell them in the black market for 500 rupees. And so when Rachna Kera wrote the report, that was what it was. That 50,000 operators put out of a livelihood because UIDA claimed they're committing fraud. What are they going to do? I mean, start a new business, or somebody tells them, hey, you can get back in for 500 rupees, and say, sure, continue business like normal. And so what was happening is people were scrambling to restore their livelihoods by buying access on the black market and continuing the enrollment operations that the public thinks that they're still legitimately doing. Right. And so the public can't know which of these fellows are actual scammers or not anymore. Because UIDA doesn't do the one thing that they should have done, which is be on the ground and audit their own operations. That's the one thing they consistently refuse to do.
Right. So it's one thing for these scammers to have existed. The other thing, of course, is the safety of that number itself.
Yeah.
So in the course of all this, when these breaches were happening, the UIDA chief back then, who was also, I think, the TRAI chief. I forget his name.
R.S. Sharma.
R.S. Sharma?
Yes.
So R.S. Sharma puts this tweet out.
Yes. And then he declared victory because nobody had hacked him.
No. So he puts out this.
He puts out the Aadhaar number. Yes.
Saying that here's my Aadhaar number, let someone hack my account, and then this French investigator comes and the list of things they pull out.
Yes.
His personal phone number, his tax ID number, his secretary's phone number, his personal address, family photos, date of birth, frequent flyer number, model of his phone, personal purchases. They even deposited $1 in his personal bank account.
So all of that happened.
Yeah.
And our man declares victory, saying this is all public information. You could have found this anywhere. You didn't need my Aadhaar to do it. So that was a claim he made, okay? And it basically died because this fellow refused to accept any harm had come to him. What has not been covered in the news is what happened 1 year later. Okay? There are multiple government, welfare schemes which have eligibility criteria, and you must enroll for them by giving your Aadhaar number. So there's one that is for farmers. There is a welfare subsidy of 1,500 rupees per year or something like that. It's a small amount given to farmers who are below the tax paying limit. And to enroll, you just provide your Aadhaar number. Somebody put R.S. Sharma's Aadhaar number in it. He started getting, poor farmer, starving farmer subsidies, 1,500 in his account, so small that he didn't even notice. And this had been going on for a while until some reporter discovered it and pointed it out and said, per the terms of that scheme, what you've done is fraud. Okay? You can be penalized for this.
Right.
And our man just calls, authorities and says, remove my number from this database. And obviously never gets prosecuted. Because he's got that protection of being in the bureaucracy that they don't go after him. But they will go after somebody else who's a victim of this kind of fraud. Sure. That is not a news item anymore because now it's not interesting enough to be a news item.
Actually, that's the thing. So I was looking up the news items. There was this peak in 2018, of course, because the Aadhaar
Act of the court case going on at that point.
The 5-judge bench which was hearing the Aadhaar Act and it was legally, enacted, and this question of the money bill came up and all of that. Nevertheless, it was passed. Yeah. But that was a kind of a watershed year where a series of investigations happened. Hackers, ethical hackers, exposed loopholes in this database. What happened after that? Where did these people vanish? Where's everybody?
So first of all, none of those things have been fixed.
No, but where are the campaigners? Where did they all of them vanish?
This fatigue. How long are you going to say this problem is still there today when nobody's paying attention anymore? And so it's not like the problems have been fixed. They're all still there. What's happened is you have general fatigue of not being heard, of the government being impenetrable to feedback, and then you got a pandemic which messes with everybody's livelihood, and then you have people trying to figure out how to stay alive, dealing with their own families falling sick, dealing with the business models falling apart, general chaos in the market, and the only time you get to voice an opinion again is when the elections come around. Yeah? Which I think the public has given some feedback of, what they think is happening in this country versus how the government seems to pretend, it's going. But the problems are all still there. None of them have been fixed.
The campaigners have vanished.
The campaigners are all around, at least, the ones I'm in touch with. But it's a question of saying, what is the point anymore? Yeah.
I throw that back to you only. So
Yes.
What is the point right now? What can you achieve?
Well, so one of the things that I have is, I have 2 court cases going on right now. And all I can do is wait for justice through an, avenue where there is actual hope, which is hopefully a good court order. I mean, it's a prayer, because court orders don't necessarily indicate justice. They just indicate luck. Yeah? That you're lucky you got some outcome out of a court order. But it's that. It's keep grinding at that. Wait for it to come around at some point. Keep pointing out when people make faulty assumptions about how to use this technology. Yeah? Because it doesn't work the way people seem to think it works. And it is so complicated that I've found that experts don't understand it. The people who work on Aadhaar don't really understand it, because they think the part they worked on is the whole thing. And the fact that there is just so much other machinery involved that has made its own interpretations of it, they just don't pay attention to it. Now, for instance, after this article came out, there was somebody on Twitter arguing with me saying that, Aadhaar is linked to your biometrics. What is on your card is immaterial. You can put your name as Hanuman, you can put your name as Tommy the dog, which is what people have done in the past. It doesn't matter because it's still linked to your biometrics. It is your identity, and therefore, in some way, it is liberating because you can call yourself what you want. Yeah? Which is the nice claim. Except in most use cases, there is no biometrics involved. They're just taking the card, taking a photocopy, taking the number. They're not cross-checking with your online database. And therefore, if you change the details on the card and you get a second card, which you can do, you have to update your details, you'll get a second card. Both of your cards are currently valid. Yeah? There is no expiry date on them. There is no requirement to return the card. You can make fake identity as long as you can get it past the document, update process. And lots of people have done that. So if my life now involves using the card with no online verification, because everybody's given up on it and they've taken the shortcut of saying the card is enough, then I do have 2 identities. Okay? So where is this biometrics in play anymore? You can't defend yourself and say, no, we designed it perfectly. The people who are using it are not using it correctly. Yeah? But what kind of an excuse is that? Yeah?
Now, there is all of this faultiness in the way it has been designed, imagined. There seem to be cracks that were worked into the designing of the system.
Yeah.
So there is that aspect, and then there is this other sinister, monster that we're looking at, which is the eye in the sky.
Yeah.
The surveillance
Yes.
infrastructure and how this data allows anybody to triangulate us.
Yes.
Figure out where we're coming from, where we are going.
Yes.
Right? And that has multiple dimensions. Where we are going, we're talking about predictive crime, for example.
Exactly.
Profiling. Why? Because you can profile somebody down to the point of predicting how this person will react to a certain stimulus, let's say,
Yeah.
And that is again very scary, because if you're talking about, say, dog whistle politics.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You know that if you give out a dog whistle to a targeted audience,
yeah,
right, they will most likely respond in a certain way. So instead of sending out a public message for carnage, you could be targeting the message down to a few individuals who you can count on based on how much data you have on them to act in a certain way. So there is all of this thing which kind of accrues, to somebody who is in a position to surveil us. Right? Now, the question comes as to democracy, checks and balances, civilian administration, the fact that there's an elected body out there. This is not an authority in the same way as the Chinese administration perhaps is.
Yes.
Right? And there's a civilian control to some extent into this. And then somebody else would say there's the deep state, that there is no control over the deep state by the civilian administration. So now tell me, in terms of surveillance, what is it that we should really be afraid of? How do you see it panning out? Literally, if from a lot of what people like you say, there's a very dark kind of dystopian future that emerges, right?
Yeah.
A projection of that kind of thing. So what kind of things do you think will start happening?
So I tend to be an optimist in these scenarios. I'm not afraid of the dystopia of perfect surveillance. It is not achievable. It is not going to happen. My sense is, instead, every time you have a faulty implementation, it ends up being a power grab, that some source of authority in government is trying to grab extra power for itself. And these technology implementations are a way to say, we will do that. And they always have very noble intentions in their stated mission. They just haven't thought about what that means. So it'll always be things like, there is corruption at the lower level of the bureaucracy. We want insight into what they are doing so that we can stop the corruption and fix the process. So it always going to be a noble purpose like this. And they define it by saying, therefore, the solution is all the power must be relocated to us. And we control it through the database. Without paying attention to the fact that their position is not permanent. Somebody else is going to take that place and start abusing their power. And then somewhere else somebody will say, no, push it further up, centralize it even further as a way to stop the abuse happening at this level. So this is thing that happens. And one of my disappointments is the people who end up being in authority and making the decisions on doing such things are simply not educated in how governance works, and how governance plays out and how power plays out. And the second part that also tends to happen is we have a tendency to deify technological trends and say these trends are grand, they are going to reshape the world, and the people who do these things are fantastic. And it's not a modern thing, it happens everywhere in the world, it's been happening for centuries. There is always a tendency to look at the latest technological developments and the people who control it and are well versed in it, and deify them to say they are the ones who will solve problems. And so it becomes a thing of saying, this week it is all about AI, that AI is going to change the world. So everybody is worshipping the AI gurus and saying that the people who are building AI, they are the ones who are going to control the world. So whatever they say must be correct, because clearly they're powerful and they're thinking. And that's a mistake. You're replacing the method of science with the men of science. And once you do this, you can ask and say, okay, who's studied this phenomenon, and documented it. And just by asking that, you'll find that, in fact, these have all been thoroughly documented. And this is what the entire humanities field is, that there are people who specialized in all of these things, who have looked at these patterns in which mistakes are made and documented them. Unfortunately, we have a tendency to, again, stick within our domains. So you talk to management professionals, they have their management gurus, and they look at them and say, this management guru, studied this company and improved their efficiency in so many ways and so on. So whatever they say must be right. And some theorist in some other domain, we don't know who this fellow is, must be an idiot. Why should we pay attention? And that's a mistake, that we keep tending to idolize domain experts and incorrectly assume expertise in different domains, which they don't have. And they're not even claiming to sometimes. Either they are charlatans claiming that expertise, or they're just not claiming it, but people are projecting it onto them. So that happens a lot. So in this case, I would say, for instance, that if you want to understand the government's tendency to make mistakes in their technology adoption, one of the better books I can recommend is by this person named James C. Scott. He passed away a few years ago. He used to be a professor at Yale University, and the book is called Seeing Like a State. And it's a documentation of technology implementations around the world that have gone horribly wrong, with an examination of saying what went wrong there. And it's including the Europe, including Americas, and so on. It's a fantastic book. But then he goes back even further, because one of the things that he was not satisfied by is to say, is this a modern thing? Is this a function of democracy or function of the modern nation state? And so he's got a new book, which was, I think, the last book he published. It's called Against the Grain. Goes into an examination of what civilization is, and says that basically this pattern of behavior is inherent to society. It's been going on for 10,000 years. Goes back to the very dawn of civilization and looks at settled societies in Mesopotamia and says, what are these people doing? Why did civilization evolve in a certain form? And basically says that, look, this is an inherent tendency, that it's always going to be this way. It's always going to be about grabbing power. It's not about good versus evil. It's about power versus powerless. Power accumulates, and any critique of society has to be a critique of power. That's one of the fundamental theses that he comes out with. And so I look at this and say, okay, then maybe this is the way to think about it. That you always look at any kind of technology going on, and when somebody says some technology will solve a problem, it will not. Technology is a tool. It depends on who's using the tool and what they're doing with it. And so you always look at the users of the tool, not the tool itself. You look at whose intent is being magnified through a technology and ask and say, what is that intent? And what happens when the technology magnifies it for them? And that will give you an idea of what it is. And so I'm not concerned about whether Aadhaar is technically sound or not, because every technology has problems. Every technology will be improved. It's always about who wants this damn thing and why do they want it,
and to whom it gives power.
Yes.
Now, to whom it gives power, right? Now, in the way power has been divided in society, you have the rulers, you have a bunch of people who are citizens, and then you have the subjects.
Yes.
And the subjects are invariably that, they're the thickest layer of the demographic. Right? You have the slaving hordes, you have a few people who see themselves as citizens, whose voices the state also recognizes, oh, the citizens are speaking. Right? Which translates into many public agitations and things like that we see. Some of them translate into government action, some of them don't.
Yes.
So when it's a rape case, it matters as to who's the person who's been raped.
Yes.
An Adivasi woman in Bastar might be getting raped every day, but if it is something that happens in a Delhi or a Calcutta, then it's national news. Now, that's where I try to draw this distinction between citizens and subjects. The subjects are the people who don't matter. Now, in this debate, one of the things that a lot of people say about privacy is that it is a preoccupation of the citizen, not the subject. It is perhaps even an elite preoccupation, because privacy matters to whom? Somebody who has something to keep private.
Yes.
And here you have people living on the road whose lives are public, as public can be. They live, for almost as eyesores, if you want to call it that. To a lot of people, they are eyesores. And poverty is public and wealth is private. Right? That the ones who are seeking this privacy are people who have something, which they don't want discovered out in the thing, but there's somebody who's absolutely naked, who has nothing to hide. How do you respond to that initial thing as to, for the poor person, it doesn't matter, privacy doesn't matter?
Yeah, that's completely incorrect. And it's not always immediately obvious why it's incorrect. So one thing is, this comment about privacy is usually not about privacy. It is better to understand it in terms of individualism and say, are you in a culture where you are respected as an individual with individual opinions, and the space in which to form those opinions and express them? And our comments on privacy are usually a mistaken understanding of individualism, and we define individualism as privacy, and therefore we say, if they're in a culture where there is no space for individualism, the privacy must not exist. That's a mistake.
That must not exist becomes irrelevant.
Yes, so it's a misunderstanding. This is not privacy at all. This is individualism. Okay? And individualism as a cultural artifact is definitely not, uniform. There are cultures in which you are given more affordance as an individual. There are cultures in which you are not.
And India and its constitution, in fact, one of its foundational principles is to give the right to the individual.
Yes.
To recognize the dignity right of one person as opposed to one community or a group of people. So
So there is that. In fact, there are, I've been lucky to discover that this is also a topic that has been well studied, and you look at this and say, what does it mean to be an individual? And what is the manifestation of an individual? And so I was reading a book that kind of took me on a really long trip examining this concept and saying, let's look at art, traditional art. Does the artist sign their painting? You've got temples in this country that are like thousands of years old. Who are the artists who carved those things? Have they signed their work? You look at, say, Mughal art. They were clearly patrons of the arts. There are documentations, on who they hired and, who was hired to do what work and so on. But how many of those paintings have signatures on them? Is the work itself signed, or did you discover the identity of the artist through some other records? At what point in history does a signature on a work become important enough that you recognize the work by the artist and by their signature? And what was the cultural transformation that brought the artist up to being in the forefront? versus just being a skilled artisan whose identity does not matter. Okay? And so I was looking at this, and that book went into an explanation of, where did this transition happen? What was the cultural conditions under which it happened? And in the process of looking at all of that, I realized that it sounds like a description of privacy. Yeah? That all that we say about, rich people have privacy, poor people don't have privacy, and by their culture itself, therefore privacy is not important. And here is this description of where individualism comes from in the historic arc of, world cultures, and it's the same damn description, And so this is a point I had to realize and say that, look, first of all, we're not even understanding what privacy means. And I still don't have a clean definition of what privacy is, but what I've learned is that privacy is an articulation of power. Okay? That if, say...
Power of an individual in relation to the state?
In relation to their environment. Now, for instance, you can say, Google and Apple and Facebook all have my data, so what privacy are you talking about? Okay? But the fact is that, let's say Google has my search history because it's in the browser, that is stored in the cloud because, it's all over there. Therefore, they can analyze it. I don't have privacy. But one question is, what are they doing with it that affects me as an individual? Second, can I go delete my search history? Yeah? Yes, I can. And Google is very clear about that. That whatever information they hold on you as an individual can be traced back to you as an individual will appear in your dashboard, and you have the choice of keeping it there or removing it. What they've done with aggregates may or may not be technically sound in terms of identifying you, and that you can prosecute them on if it is not technically sound. But that is not a privacy debate. Yeah? The privacy part of it is, do I have the power to decide what you do with my data? Yeah? And so, in any situation where an individual is not given that power, they do not have privacy. And that is what the state must regulate. That the state must make it mandatory that you can never take away somebody's power by removing their control over their data. So, once you reframe it as a power problem and not a culture problem, it becomes obvious thing, then this is what you need to fix. That any design in which you assume that it doesn't matter whether they have any say in what happens to them is a defect.
Interesting that you say that, because I feel like a lot of people do not, and this is not with the coming of Aadhaar, but for a much longer time, if you want to really go back, you go back to the, the censuses, the colonial census.
Yeah.
And the post-colonial census, post-independence, the way people have been enumerated, the parameters on which they have been enumerated.
Right.
A certain section, and in this case, let's even say, specifically, let's say SC and ST, have really had little control over what kind of data about them is extracted in the name of
the census,
targeted delivery,
yeah,
in the name of this is a community that needs to be uplifted.
Yeah.
So we will have all the data as to subcaste, income, bio, medical history, so many other things, are extracted by the state on a regular basis, not through one agency, but through multiple agencies. The census is just one vehicle to extract this information. But, when I was thinking about privacy a little deeply, I was thinking about, how a lot of people today who are like a little dismissive of these concerns that you raise, they'll say, oh, well, in the 80s, a bunch of people from Bangalore and Hyderabad went to the US, to Silicon Valley. They came back, one bunch implemented these technologies, another bunch started opposing these technologies. They're part of the same whole. We don't know about this conversation. This is some American conversation. In America, privacy and things like that are things which are like enshrined in their ethos, not just in their...
Right, but it's not.
It is not, but nevertheless, this individual freedom, individual rights concept is something that, is taken very seriously in a liberal
but
state.
That's the same thing again. You're confusing individualism with privacy, which is not the same thing.
And, so when they were talking like that, I started thinking about, profiling and privacy in a country like India, where India is not a place like in the US. There's a certain thing of, you experience a certain liberating anonymity. If you were in New York or in LA or any one of these,
because your
cities,
differences are
because your differences are not interesting to anybody, because you might want to be somebody else.
Yeah.
You may want to, you can be anybody you want. That anonymity that a city, this cosmopolitan anonymity that a city provides, is a liberating experience for women, for people of different marginalities and all of that. And then you come to an India which lives in the villages, either lives in the villages or its cities are socially organized like villages. And why do I say this? In this context, anonymity is not a luxury. Like you may have anonymity in an Indranagar, Koramangala. You go 2 kilometers from there to a GM Pale or a Tipsangla.
Everybody's going to be looking at you.
Everybody knows who you are.
Yeah.
What do you eat at home? What your religion, caste, who you're married to. These are things which are part of social surveillance.
Yes.
So we're a very surveilled society. Why? Because we're also a segregated society.
Yeah.
So you have this entire history of profiling, of boxing in, of boxing out.
Yeah.
And all of that. So in a country like India, my last question, this is like a philosophical question.
Yeah.
If you were to be speaking to those surveilled, profiled kind of communities, we've had a history of, let's say, entire communities classified as criminal tribes and these things. How do you appeal to their sense of outrage? How do you convince them that this is something that matters to them? Not just to somebody who has a social media history, who has an Amazon account and has a purchase history, but it affects them also.
So, if you use this lens of, are they culturally afforded individualism? And obviously, if you're afforded individualism, you have some level of privacy, because that's a condition to being an individual. But that's not all, because the other part of privacy, which is about exercise of power, of who has information on me, is something that happens even in these societies where you think there is absolutely no scope for privacy, because they don't even have a toilet. They're using public toilets, or not public toilets, they're defecating in the open. Everybody in the society knows everything about them. You can say all of that and they will still find privacy in their practices. And the inability to see that can have devastating consequences for social programs that are blind to it, and cause damage to it. As a simple example, let's say you got a household in which the husband's a drunkard, and is not careful with the money. But the wife has to do something for her children, finds a way to hide money, and builds up a corpus of safety net for the children, not for herself. Because it's not an individualistic society. It's not about saying, I want to be safe. It's more about saying, I want my family to be safe, I'm hiding money. Okay? And that's privacy, because the husband doesn't know that the money is there. It's all collecting under the bed or collecting in some corner where he doesn't look. And then you get demonetization, and all that money has to come out to go to the bank. You have destroyed the woman's privacy. That is a problem. That's a kind of mistake that happens when you think there was no privacy in the first place, because you confused individualism with privacy.
Okay. That's an interesting thing for another time. Individualism and privacy. Right now we are a little out of time, Kiran, but thank you so much for this conversation. I hope that provokes some thought in the direction of what kind of regime we are entering, what kind of an ecosystem exists right now in terms of surveillance, in terms of how our data is used and how it is stored. Kiran, thank you again for being on this show. And we'll see you next time again with another episode.
Thank you
for now.
And for those of you who are not subscribers to the News Minute, please subscribe. We need news media that actually gives us news, which is a rare thing in the country these days.
And we don't, of course, ask you for your Aadhaar number to get a subscription. So please do subscribe. Thank you so much. Thank you.